Welcome. My name is Katie Hunt Thomas. I'm the Director of Advocacy for the Ability Center of Greater Toledo. And I want to welcome everybody here to Train Day here in Northwest Ohio. We're here to support faster, more accessible, and more comprehensive passenger rail service to Toledo. Last year, the Federal Rail Administration announced that it planned to revolutionize rail service in the United States. Through the FRA's new programs, the City of Toledo could see an increase in access to jobs, medical care, and social opportunities for people with disabilities. We are all here today to show support for that initiative. The FRA and the state of Ohio have identified a rail corridor through the Corridor ID program that would go from Detroit through Toledo to Cleveland. And then the FRA has also made a proposed select route for their long distance rail corridor that would go from Detroit to Toledo to Columbus. These would be great opportunities for people with disabilities here in Toledo. I'd like all of you to participate, so while you're here, get a Toledo on Track tattoo, get a sticker, get a t-shirt, take a photo and upload it to social media. We'd love to see your support for passenger rail. We're going to see State Representative Michelle Grimm, the Executive Director of the Toledo Metropolitan Area Council on Government, Sandy Spang, John Esserly, who's the Executive Director of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Rail Lobbyists for AAO, Councilwoman Teresa Morris, who's the Councilwoman for District 6 at City of Toledo, Katie Shelley, the Condo Family Manager of Access Initiatives at the Toledo Museum of Art, and then Stuart James will close us up, the Executive Director of the Ability Center. Later today at 1:30, we're going to hear from Federal Representative Marcy Kaptur as well. But without further introduction, State Representative Michelle Grimm.
This is a little awkward because of the wind, but that's okay. So good afternoon, my name is Michelle Grimm and I serve as State Representative for House District 43, which includes part of Toledo and the village of Ottawa Hills. I also serve as the Assistant Whip for the House Democratic Caucus and Ranking Member on the House Transportation Committee. First, I'd like to thank everyone who has been involved with planning and coordinating this event, especially our friends at the Ability Center. Thank you so much for advocating for access to transportation for everyone and being partner in bringing passenger rail to this region. Thank you to everyone here. I appreciate your passion, and your dedication, and your advocacy is needed now more than ever. Access to passenger rail is more than transportation. It's about connecting our state, connecting people, and creating a better future for all Ohioans. Every Ohioan, regardless of ability, should have access to various types of transportation to ensure access to the health care they need, visit friends and family, and even see a concert. Passenger rail offers that transportation option. In my role as ranking member on the Ohio House Transportation Committee, I work to advocate for transportation options and changes that make our state not only a safer place, but the best place to move around. While I remain committed to this goal, it is essential that I and other state representatives continue to hear from passionate community members like yourself as the corridor ID process for passenger rail routes moves forward. At the State House and here in Toledo, I will continue to be an advocate wherever I can, because I know that access to passenger rail in Ohio will be about more than another way to get around. It will represent a new way of life for millions of Ohioans. Thank you again for having me and for all of you for being here. And we have a very fantastic lineup of speakers ahead to talk more about the exciting things to come. And the next one is Sandy Spang.
Hello, everyone. Is it afternoon yet? Good afternoon. And thank you for joining us here today. Thank you to the organizers for making this happen. We know at TMACOG that Toledo has no shortage of passenger rail enthusiasts. How do we know that? Well, every 5 years, we do a long-range transportation plan. We're in the process right now of creating, moving forward, a plan that looks out to 2055 with a plan for transportation for our region. And there are some areas that we hear over and over again that people want to see transportation improvements in our region. They want to see more pedestrian and bike options, but they want passenger rail. But if you look back in the last few transportation plans, these plans are renewed every 5 years. You see going back, plan after plan, going backwards. Passenger rail, we want passenger rail. So the advocates are there. And they go across all sectors of our population. We see that senior citizens want passenger rail. University students want to be able to go back and forth to school with passenger rail. Those of us with disabilities want passenger rail. People who like to travel but don't want the responsibility of a car want passenger rail. People who want to get to work by passenger rail. But we haven't had movement in our region on passenger rail. We saw with disappointment that our state returned money for passenger rail to the federal government. We haven't had movement, and now we have exciting news. The Corridor ID program identified 69 corridors across the country for either improvement of existing corridors of passenger rail or new corridors to be added. And Ohio was chosen for 4 corridors, including, of so much excitement to us, the corridor, as Katie mentioned earlier, from Cleveland to Toledo to Detroit to Chicago, and the long-range corridor coming up from New Orleans through Columbus to Toledo to Detroit, and possibly eventually a corridor going in, additionally added into Canada. This is exciting news, and sometimes when exciting news like this is announced, people think, well, there you go, I just need to wait. That's going to happen. But as you're going to learn from the next speaker, John Esterly, it's not that simple. This is just the first phase. This is just the early planning phases. And some of you in this group are old enough to remember a famous American comic. Well, I guess you could say, was he a comic or was he a comedian? A humorist, that's what I think we called him, a famous American humorist, Will Rogers. Will Rogers said a lot of great things, funny things that were often had lots of grains of truth in them. And he said, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. And I think that that's what we need to remember right now. Because of those 69 corridors that were identified in the United States, they're not all going to be built. These are early stages in the study of these corridors. And what we need to make certain is that the federal government, the state government, everyone knows that Northwest Ohio wants passenger rail. And days like this, that's right, let's just say it, let's just show it. Northwest Ohio will support passenger rail. Passenger rail makes sense for Northwest Ohio. Now, how do we know that? Just because we want it, we think we want it? No. Because there have been studies done. And you're going to hear from Councilwoman Morris about those studies. Because TMACOG and the City of Toledo partnered on a study, and then the City of Toledo did yet another study that made the case for passenger rail between Toledo and Detroit. And that helped us secure our place in the Corridor ID program. because we share workforce with Cleveland and Detroit. And there is a lot of tourism between Toledo and Detroit and Toledo and Cleveland. Just me going to watch my Tigers play. There's some right there. But our museum, the museums in Cleveland and Detroit, sports teams, think about it. All the major league teams in Cleveland and Detroit, there is so much movement between our cities that will justify this. And the economic returns that these studies showed, there is so much reason that we can quantify and so much ridership that we know. And we know that Amtrak supports this as well. And that this was one of the routes that the state supported as well. So what we need to remember is what Will Rogers said, that even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. So let's not just sit here. Let's keep this advocacy going. And let's remember that big changes like this can take even years. So let's not let up on our advocacy. Let's keep that enthusiasm going, because for the first time in a long time, we've got real movement, real momentum, and real potential here. And Northwest Ohio wants passenger rail. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to a real expert on passenger rail, John Esterly. Let's give him a hand.
Well, thank you so much, friends. It is always a pleasure to come back home. And I can't thank everybody enough for being here. Today's date has a special significance. This is the 155th anniversary of the Golden Spike being driven that connected East and West in the Transcontinental Railroad. So I think it's important to kind of note that we are here on a very specific day today. So again, thank you so much for being here today. I kind of drew the short straw. I get to talk about the technical stuff, where we're at and where we're going. So we've mentioned a couple of different funding streams. The one I'll focus on today is the Corridor ID program, which is specifically for state-sponsored or locally sponsored shorter distance routes. So the one that we've mentioned between Cleveland and Toledo and Detroit would be the one that I think everybody here should be excited about. And I'll tell you why. You could get on a train in Toledo and go to Cleveland, or go to Detroit faster than you could drive. I'll say that again, faster than you could drive. So one of the biggest pushbacks that we get when we talk about passenger rail is, well, it's going to take longer. Well, sometimes it does, but this route is unique in that both directions you would go out of our station here in Toledo, you would get there faster than you could drive. So where are we at in the process? So this is a 3-step process. Step 1 is where we kind of dust off the application and put together a plan for the plan. That's where we're at right now. We have started that process. The Ohio Rail Development Commission, who has been tasked with managing the rest of this study, they are putting out a request for proposal to figure out who's going to do the next 2 steps. Step 2 is where the meat and potatoes happens. That's where we develop our service development plan, figure out where the stops along the way are going to be. We're going to figure out where trains are going to start and stop their day, when the stops are going to be. Now, the good news is state-sponsored rail means daylight service. So let me say that again. State-sponsored rail means daylight service. You'll be able to get on a train not at 4:30 in the morning, but at a time that makes sense for us. Step 2 is also where we make decisions about who the operator is going to be. Presumably Amtrak will be the one to operate, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room at the table for a private contractor. There's a lot of talk about the Brightline model in the Florida area that's been wildly successful. We're going to make those decisions then. And then step 3, which is the final step of the process, is really where we make a decision about how many cross ties we need to replace, how many road crossings we need to upgrade, what the actual nuts and bolts are going to cost. And we present that to the sponsor, which in this case is the state of Ohio. So what can you folks in the audience do? So advocacy is going to look like this, at least in the short term. We need to let our elected officials know at all levels of government that this is important to us. We need to let them know that it's a good investment, that we spend billions of dollars on streets and bridges that move one person around at a time, and we're asking for a very small fraction of that to look at large-scale passenger rail that would move hundreds of people at a time from point to point. I would certainly recommend that we look at not only our state legislature, who's going to be responsible for the local match, but also the national legislators, and let them know that Amtrak funding is important, infrastructure funding is important, and that it's important to continue to invest in the growth of Northwest Ohio. And then finally, we do have a piece of legislation that was just introduced in the State House to rejoin what's called the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, say that 5 times fast, or MIPRC. This really gives us a seat at the table to talk about things like, why are the trains coming through Ohio at 4:30 in the morning and at a more usable time? And we are not part of this commission at the moment. So I would certainly recommend that you advocate specifically on that bill to get us back at the table, because as we look at more potential routes throughout Ohio, it's going to become critical that those routes match up with the other long distance routes throughout the country. Other than that, I would certainly encourage you to stop by our table. We've got information about everything I just said. I'm happy to dig deeper in on any of those items if you've got an interest. And certainly, again, thank you for being here. I would encourage your advocacy. And then it is my pleasure to introduce Councilwoman Teresa Morris, who has some remarks.
Thank you so much. I am privileged to be here to represent the city of Toledo. In the audience, I do see Councilwoman Sir Sandra McPherson, wave. And Council President Hartman was here. I don't know if she's still here. I don't know if there's any other members here. Before I start my remarks, I just wanted to say huge thank you to Katie and to Sally, because without their interest and enthusiasm, you would not see this today. So thank you so much for all of your efforts. Wave, please tell them who you are. Thank you. So I am the luckiest girl in Toledo today. I get to talk to you about how Toledo leads the way in intercity rail by putting their money where their mouth is. So far, Toledo has led the way long before the current excitement of the expansion of Amtrak. Thus far, the city of Toledo has put up a lion's share of nearly $400,000 for various studies to evaluate both a northern segment that includes a route from Toledo to Monroe to Detroit, Ann Arbor, Dearborn. Detroit can also go up to the airport with possible connectivity to Traverse City. Let's talk about Canada. Let's talk about a southern segment from Toledo to Columbus and preferably Bowling Green and Findlay. In 2018, former Councilman Delaney was motivated to get a feasibility study of a regional rail system centered around job access after an Ohio poverty study report was released, showing that Lucas County had the highest rate of poverty of any major county in the state of Ohio. So he proposed spending $30,000 to join with TEMACOG with $20,000 to look to start the first feasibility study. And that study reported that there was a significant possibility that the modern regional intercity rail, it's hard to do this when your hair is all over the place, system operating at 110 miles per hour with a route that would include stops in Toledo, Monroe, Detroit, would likely generate enough ridership to not only cover its own operating costs, but would generate a profit and would be likely independent utility. This would allow the residents of the greater region to access 197,000 jobs in downtown Detroit, 110,000 jobs in Ann Arbor, 37,000 jobs in Detroit, 28,000 jobs in Ypsilanti, 19,000 jobs in Dearborn, and 38,000 jobs in Toledo. Let's not even count the connectivity between Cleveland and Chicago and all other points in the Midwest. In addition, it would develop $500 million of development and construction in Toledo, wherever the train station was located. Perhaps it would be at our local train station over at Temecula. Maybe it would be $102 billion in Detroit. Another study was funded by Temecula and the city of Bowling Green. $20,000 was spent to test a Toledo to Columbus southern segment. That suggested, like the northern segment from Toledo to Detroit, that the southern segment would not likely, unfortunately, operate at a profit. So what do we have to do? We sponsored another $300,000 to take the northern segment studies to the next level in hopes that the Federal Railway Administration would seek funding. And I want to thank my colleagues for supporting that. So where are we at now? Now we need to get everything funded, and we need to get in the Federal Railway Corridor Identification Program, and we could see another $500,000 to be made to study. This is not something that happens overnight, and I know the word study can have a bad connotation, but I'll tell you right now, we need to get this moving. The project has a potential to operate at a profit, and we can see a lot of public and private partnerships, and we should look at other places where they're doing this. We could connect universities and colleagues together. We could connect collaborations to study new technologies in rail and intermodal systems, and investing in the Midwest makes sense. We are in the middle of the country, making us in the sweet spot for development and moving product. And we have the best, and I'll say it louder, best workforce on the planet. We could create a hub where the rail lines and the cars can be serviced, again, creating more jobs. So from the beginning, this entire proposal has been about jobs, jobs, and jobs, creating an opportunity to access employment opportunities for all. It has always been about a working train that can be affordable to all, operating at a high degree of on-time, reliable service with frequent run times, many times per day to accommodate the flexible need of its riders. So gone is the day of the tired, old-fashioned, limited schedule, high-priced, and unreliable vacation train systems. Let's talk about this area as a mega region. Let's talk about the benefits of living in a hyper-regionally focused high-speed rail ecosystem. Imagine a life when you can travel with hands-free, worry-from your residence all throughout the Midwest. Have your friends join you at the Toledo Zoo, the Art Museum, a Mud Hens game, or the Toledo Glass City Metro Glass Fest. Let's all do it together. You can have all your friends come down and you can show them Toledo and what all we have to offer. This would also be a hub of intermodal connectivity for light rail, heavy rail, and bus routes. You can live at the train station, you can shop at the train station. This would be all kinds of development, and we should accept nothing less. At the time, we are amassing a group of interested organizations, cities, townships, and the public. At one of the locations, we have these. Please come and get them. It has a QR code that will take you right to our mailing list. Please come and get on board, and let's show them what Toledo has to offer. Thank you. And now I introduce Katie Shelley to the podium.
And hello everyone, my name is Katie Shelley, and I am the Conda Family Manager of Access Initiatives at the Toledo Museum of Art. But I come here today as a Toledoan, as a person with a disability, to share with you my personal story about taking passenger rail and how I was able to travel independently using passenger rail in a way that I was never able to do and have never been able to do by taking a plane. So last summer, I had the fabulous opportunity to be a camp counselor at a camp in upstate New York for girls with disabilities. And this was something that I was really passionate about, something that I was super excited to do and to experience, and it was a wonderful experience. But I was a little bit nervous because I was taking the train from Toledo to Albany, and I had never taken a train before in my life. So, at those wee hours of the morning that the train comes through Toledo, at about 3:15 a.m., I boarded the train in Toledo to go to Albany, New York. And I was so pleasantly surprised. Not only was I able to independently get on the train with the assistance of the conductors, but they were able to show me to my seat, again, without assistance. And I was seated next to the restroom, which I was pleasantly surprised to find out I could use independently without assistance, and my wheelchair actually fit in the restroom on the train. This is unheard of. Having flown in planes my entire life to get to long distance destinations, I am constantly used to not being able to use the restroom on airplanes without assistance, or just not being able to use them at all, because let's face it, airplane restrooms are not accessible for anybody. So I was pleasantly surprised that I was able to get to Albany. It was a very long train ride, but I was just so pleased that I was able to do this independently and make it work. So you can imagine my frustration when, unfortunately, on my way back from New York, my train was canceled due to service disruption. And I had spent the week outdoors with teenage girls with disabilities, and I was ready to get home. So instead of waiting another day for a train to take me back home to Toledo, I decided to take a plane from Syracuse to Detroit, and it ended up being one of the worst travel experiences of my life. Another thing I should mention is that I was able on the train to take this wheelchair that I use every day, and not have to worry about it being damaged, and not have to worry about whether or not it would fit on the train. It fit, it wasn't damaged, I was good to go. I was able to use it throughout camp, but most of the time when I travel by plane, I have to use a travel wheelchair, and not everybody has that luxury to change wheelchairs. In fact, most people who use wheelchairs do not have that luxury and must use the chair that they use every day, and they're left to the mercy of the planes and the people working on the planes to make sure that they treat their chair with respect. And oftentimes, and I have had chairs in the past get damaged due to how assistive devices are loaded onto planes. They are basically just thrown underneath a plane. And so I was cognizant of that taking the train home, but I was convinced that this was going to be faster. It was going to get me home, and it was going to, I could take a shower. I hadn't showered in 7 days. So I got a flight, and I was ready to go. I was seated on the flight. I had given the airline my information about my wheelchair, and never at one point during that period did they raise any concerns or questions that my wheelchair would not be able to fit in the plane. They kicked me off that flight because they could not fit my chair underneath the plane. So there I was, stuck at the Syracuse airport, and to make matters worse, they also couldn't find me an accessible hotel room. And then when they found me an accessible hotel room, they couldn't find me accessible transportation to get to that hotel room. So I was very fortunate that one of my fellow camp counselors still had the accessible vehicle that we use to transport the campers with disabilities back and forth to the airports. She was able to come pick me up and take me to the hotel. But at this point in time, I was very discouraged. I went from feeling like I could be independent, I could do this by taking the train, to all of a sudden feeling as though I had no power over this situation. To make matters worse, my luggage had got sent back to Detroit, so I was without luggage. And I was completely left to my own devices to try to figure out how I was going to get back from Syracuse to Detroit. The next morning, they were able to get me on a bigger plane on a flight to Atlanta, and then from Atlanta to Detroit. But by the time I got home, I was just so devastated and frustrated that I never wanted to travel again. I am traveling by plane again. I have traveled by plane since then. But it took me a while to come to terms with that because I have been a person with a disability my entire life. And I have always understood that there are always going to be different ways for me to do things. But never have I felt so completely discriminated against. I mean, I was devastated that I was kicked off the flight. And that, you know, it just made me, that was one of the first times my disability really made me feel less than and like my needs weren't important. And increased passenger rail could do so much, not just for me to be able to get to cities like Detroit. I have family in Detroit. I would love to get there in under an hour. But it would also mean the world to other people with disabilities to be able to independently travel and enjoy what we have to offer, but also for other people with disabilities from those cities to come see Toledo and see what we have to offer. So at the Toledo Museum of Art, I met a man at a conference who is a blind individual, and we have a tactile bust of George Washington in our Expanding Horizons exhibition at the Toledo Museum of Art, if you ever come visit us. And he is a coin collector, and he wanted to see what George Washington felt like. But he lives in Cleveland, and he couldn't figure out a good way other than taking the train at very early hours in the morning to get from Cleveland to Toledo, and then make sure that he can get transportation from the train station to the museum and then be able to make it back all in the same day. It just wasn't feasible for him. So he wasn't able to do it. And I felt so bad that I couldn't help him find a way. But if there was faster service and increased service from Cleveland to Toledo, he would have been able to do that. I think that would have been a really special moment for us to share with him at the Toledo Museum of Art. So all this to say, thank you all so much for coming out here today and to listening to what we have to say and for listening to my story. And I really hope that this encourages you to advocate for increased passenger rail in the Toledo area. And I am going to pass it to Stuart James, the Executive Director of the Ability Center, to wrap up the speaking portion of today's event. Thank you.
Thank you guys all for coming today. Passenger rail is, well, actually public transportation in general is the center of the universe for people with disabilities. And everywhere I've lived, and I've lived in a lot of places around the world, public transportation is the center of the universe for everyone. And it starts with trains. And the idea that we're going to have passenger rail coming to Northwest Ohio for the first time is really exciting. It's really exciting. And it's why we're putting so much effort into making this happen. A lot of resources. It's why these folks up here are working so hard. And it's why you guys came to help us. Because as it was said previously, Northwest Ohio will support passenger rail. And so we're really excited about it. I'd like to take a minute to thank my staff. Sorry, Norman's not behaving very well. My staff, Katie Hunt Thomas, Sally, especially Sally, because actually, could we have a round of applause for Sally? Because she put this together. And Jules and all the staff. I got a lot of my team over there. So I appreciate their efforts. Michael's here today. I'd like to thank the media for coming today. We're really excited about this. We're gonna make it happen. We're too close. So thank you guys all for coming. I wanted to say that I'm so excited that I get to introduce this person. When we moved here 2 years ago, my mom moved up from Florida. And when she found out she could vote for Marcy Kaptur, she was more excited about that than seeing my kids. Seriously. And so this woman has done so much for the city of Toledo. She's done so much for Northwest Ohio. We are so appreciative of her. She's a longtime advocate of passenger rail, and we're on the verge of getting it. I'm very privileged and proud to introduce Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur.
Stewart, oops, you okay here? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out for Train Day. Toledo wouldn't have all of us without the trains. That was a major way that we settled and our industry started, and it's just a great honor to be here on this important day. And we thank all of our elected officials for being here. You didn't make it easy for them to identify you, so we thank them very much for their courtesy and coming out here today. Trains are very much a part of who we are. Who wants to take a guess how many passengers actually came through on Amtrak last year here in Toledo? Anybody want to take a guess? Who's not? I'm not calling on an expert, just a general crowd. Who wants to take a guess? How many it's when the train comes, and I think it comes, what, 3:45 a.m. in the morning for the passenger train? How many passengers do you think pass through here? Anybody want to take a guess? What? 5,000? That's a good guess. That's a good guess. It was last year 25,000. So that's a couple thousand a month come through here. We would like to make it 20 times that much, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. But most of all, thank you for coming here at the southernmost coast of the Great Lakes nation. Our major trading partner is Canada, and of course we send a lot to Mexico, and a lot comes up here from Mexico, but Canada really is Ohio's largest trading partner. And we can't live in 1946. We're into a new millennium, we're into a new century, and the roads get more crowded every day. I know, I'm on them all the time, especially the interstates. And so trains have a much more important role to play than they are currently playing in helping to connect more coherently the Great Lakes nation. There will be a day, and I hope all of you will be a part of it, when our passenger rail here, Amtrak, connects to Canadian Via. I hope we're all a part. Who's worked on Canadian Northern? Anybody been on Canadian Northern on freight? Anybody in the audience today? All right, very good. We're going to expand that. And we're going to think about how to connect ourselves to Canada, our closest trading partner and our closest ally, and to expand the amount of business that we currently have. We have over $21 billion a year in trade just from Ohio with Canada. And if you look around us at Indiana, at Michigan, at Pennsylvania, you can just quadruple that and quintuple that. So rail is a spine for us. It's not just a little asterisk. It's very, very important to our region and to our economy. All right. Now, I'm going to tell you some money we brought in here. Okay. So for the whole country, when we worked on the bill for transportation, we put $1/10 trillion. We put $108 billion into improving passenger and commercial rail across our country. And the question for us is, are we competing for those dollars federally or letting those dollars go to other places in the country? Your being here today tells me we are competing. In this past year, we were able to provide well over $10 million to some of our smaller rail lines in the region at Napoleon, Defiance, and the Western Railway in partnership with the Ohio Rail Development Commission. One of the short line rails that runs over in the east in Ashtabula, Ohio, is run by a man named Larry Lorello, and what he's into and I'm very interested in is hydrogen-powered rail. Hydrogen-powered rail. Start thinking that way because the fuel systems will change as we become more efficient in the coming decades. The good part for Toledo is we were able recently to get Amtrak to identify $500,000, and I think Sandy Spang is here from Chebecog, right? Is she here? $500,000 to do a corridor study of the Cleveland, Sandusky, Toledo, Detroit corridor, which could then expand on into Toronto. I'm thinking of running it over Lake Erie or under Lake Erie, but I'm glad to have this corridor on the map because that's the existing line right now. So we were successful because of all of you in getting that, and we are hoping that our partners to the west, not just Toledo, but Bryan and Sandusky in this corridor will also be benefited by this particular study. The Amtrak competition is pretty significant, but when we think about how could we best do it, we have to get the Amtrak trains off the freight rail. And probably the straightest corridor we could think about for the sake of the nation would run along our turnpike. That we would create a new corridor using existing easements, and that it would run literally from New York City to Paterson, New Jersey, and all the way across the turnpike, all the way out to San Francisco. You can think about a route that comes through here that's connected to places that have a lot more political power in the Congress than we do. Ohio has 15 members of Congress. California has practically 60, counting their senators. So you can talk about political power in numbers. So how do you unite to a system that connects the two most powerful coasts, the East Coast and the West Coast, through this region? You do it by thinking the turnpike and the way that we can move people more efficiently and in a more modern way, think hydrogen passenger rail all across the country. I wanted to just say a word about East Palestine and the accidents that occurred there and at Sandusky about a year ago. When the accident in Sandusky happened and we had over, I think 24 cars that actually fell over the overpass that blocked the main entrance to Sandusky and Cedar Fair, Norfolk Southern did not pay attention. The mayor of Sandusky was irate. He's such a good man. They couldn't even return a phone call until East Palestine happened. The next day, there were two workmen working to try to clean up the streets of Sandusky and get all the paraffin wax and everything else that had come out of all of those train cars. We are working with companies that do not easily cooperate with communities. So I would urge the elected officials here today, put on your list Norfolk Southern and CSX. See if you can get them here, take them through this community, show them the disgraceful overpasses that they're responsible for and are not maintaining in this community. Hold them accountable. They are very hard to work with. I don't find the same with the Canadians. I'm speaking very openly here. Just before we had our major rail convening here a year ago, the CSX CEO came to see me in Washington and allowed me 15 minutes of his time, and sent someone to our meeting here who didn't say anything. So part of our responsibility is to hold these rail companies accountable to the people here where we are underserved, and continue to work with our Canadian friends at Canadian Via, which is the passenger, and Canadian National, which is just a great company in my opinion. And we actually have people from Toledo working in all those organizations and moving up from Toledo. So, and some of the Canadians moving down here. So the rail barons of our country have to be held accountable. The last thing that I would say is, for everyone here today, all ideas are welcome on rail. I'm not wed to one plan. All I know is I want better service from Toledo. The one passenger train that comes through here comes, I think, 3:45 in the morning or something. We have to do a lot better than that, but we will not get it across northern Ohio until we have support from the rail companies and competition that comes from Canada. And we've gotten the agreement to use Cedar Fair as a convening point for rail interests and multimodal transportation across the Great Lakes region, using their headquarters, because I said, how can we get people to think creatively? There's nothing more creative than walking through Cedar Fair and seeing all this twisted track and all these rides up into the sky and everything. They might be able actually to provide some vision to the rail companies for passenger rail and how they could design something extraordinary that would move through Toledo, move through Cleveland, move through Pittsburgh, going all the way across the turnpikes that move all across our country, and paralleling rail passenger service with that. If you want to have a good time, and I'll end with this, and you want to go to Chicago, and you don't want to drive, which is probably a good idea, you can drive over to the airport in South Bend, Indiana, and park your car. And then you can get on the electric rail line that runs from South Bend right into Randolph Street in downtown Chicago. Think about that, okay? The rail line, that's an electric line at South Bend, and it's old. But there are plans from Indiana to move that rail line up the west coast of Michigan. So start thinking about how would we connect to South Bend. That might be a possibility for us. We have some folks here that know the rails very well, and there may be abandoned track that we can kind of repurpose across this region. Those plans have not been done. The organization that is charged with putting these ideas together is our Toledo Metropolitan Area Council of Governments former councilwoman, Sandy Spang, is head of that organization now and very interested in rail. So I urge all of the elected officials who are here, those who care about passenger rail and modernized freight rail, meet with her, give her ideas, look at maps, think about what could be extraordinary for this community. I thank you very, very much for allowing me to say a few words today, and thank goodness we have good weather. We can enjoy this beautiful part of the United States of America, and thank you for all the effort you put in to making our community the best place in the world to live. Thank you so much.